I don't know quite when I made an actual decision to be an artist. I spent lots of time in my childhood having lots of surgery for a very peculiar leg that, alas, I was born with. And I occupied my time in hospital by drawing and reading. And it just gradually sort of took over. When I went back to school, carrying on drawing was my obsession in a way. And it felt like when it got time to making life decisions, I couldn't imagine not carrying on doing art in some way or another. When I was at art school, one of my tutors introduced me to the wonderful world of wood engraving, which was rather a revelation. And since then, well, I suppose I've spent 30-something years being an engraver, a collage maker, a mixed media printmaker. A significant highlight early on, or a career-changing event really, was that I got a scholarship to go to Rome in 1989 and 90 and had the wonderful experience of a year living and working in Rome as an artist, and that's where my interest in more architectural subjects arose. The light generally in this country is quite sort of milky and diffuse, so you never get, or rather rarely get, very strong shadows and contrasts on a building, whereas in Rome the light is really theatrical and you get very strong dramatic shadows on the buildings, and also the sense of history that those buildings have, because you can be walking in a street in Rome and you know that underneath you there's an Etruscan tomb perhaps, and that you're walking on a Roman pavement and you're looking at a medieval doorway, and above that medieval doorway there might be a Baroque campanile of a church, and behind that you can see 20th century satellite dishes and TV aerials and all the rest of it. So Rome, I just loved the architecture because of what it said about the span of history, of civilization, and of generations of people and of cultures. And that it was that really that interested me more so than actually the architecture itself, but the sense of history of it and drama of it and metamorphosis of it. This year is the centenary year of the Society of Wood Engravers, which was founded on the 27th of March 1920. And there are all sorts of celebrations happening to mark that event, the main one of which is a major exhibition at the Ashmolean Museum of a Century of Wood Engraving, which I am curating. But the archive of the Society of Wood Engravers is at Manchester Metropolitan University in their Special Collections Library. And they too are going to be having a special celebratory exhibition. And my brief has been to create an image that can be the sort of the poster child for the exhibition at Manchester, but also to provide a kind of an emblem for the archive of the Society at Manchester. So I wanted it to have something to do with the history of wood engraving, the technique of wood engraving, and a bit of autobiography about me and my interests in wood engraving. So really it's a sort of multifaceted brief, really, a very open-ended brief, quite difficult, but we'll see. I hope that the commissioners will be pleased with it. The challenge that I've set myself is to create a sort of Tower of Babel out of still life objects in my studio. I don't normally make still life work at all, so I'm trying to choose items that have relevance to wood engraving, but are also interesting surfaces that I could approach the cutting in different ways to reflect perhaps a glass surface or foliage or wood, metal, cloth, and the challenge is to render those convincingly in wood engraving. So I'm creating that model and then making drawings and photographs from it is what I'll be doing to embark on the engraving. Now that's not a process that I normally would use. I would normally take an image from outdoors, you know, be a building or a series of buildings or whatever, and make sketches. But for this, I'm constructing something that will be a bit trompe-l'oeil, a bit surreal, but will have the sense of a Babel Tower, even though it'll be made from all kinds of still life objects. So it is a bit of a challenge. It's not something that I've approached before. It means I can sort of stage it and stage the lighting on it, this kind of thing. The first part of this model is a little paper cutout of a photocopy of a wood engraved tree by the artist Eric Gill. This was the logo that Eric Gill designed for the Society of Wood Engravers, which was founded just about exactly 100 years ago. And so I've made photocopies of Eric Gill's wood engraved logo and cut them out and assembled them here to be like a little forest at the foot of my tower. But they're also deeply symbolic, being Eric Gill's logo for the Society. I have a little plastic bull here that came from a bottle of Spanish wine, I think, some years ago. The grandfather, or the founder, if you like, of wood engraving, Thomas Bewick, made very many engravings of rural and animal scenes, and there's a particularly famous one. So this bull is a reference to that. Another little component of this construction is this pair of crutches, which come from a game of jackstraws, which I have had. It's one of my children's games. And the crutches are here as an autobiographical reference to my childhood. I was born with a disability of one of my legs and spent an awful lot of time having surgery for that in my childhood, and lots of time learning to walk again and using these things. And my time spent in hospital was the time that I learnt to draw, that I taught myself to draw, really. And my whole career as an engraver and an artist can really be traced back to that it was a way of staving off boredom in hospital and learning a skill, as it turned out, at the same time. So that's an important autobiographical reference for me. I have here a little tiny wooden chess piece that I found. That is here in this composition because a fellow wood engraver, Pete Lawrence, has described wood engraving rather effectively, I think, as like a game of chess, in that you have to think of your strategy several moves ahead. And that's so apt for wood engraving that I think it earns this little knight its place in this composition. This is a very special piece of boxwood that I've got to engrave on here, and it's a very old piece of wood. I was given it by an elderly engraver called George Chute, who had it in store for about 30 years, but it is actually a much older piece of wood than that. It's boxwood, and boxwood's a really slow growing tree. So if you take something like this, which is one of my previously engraved blocks, and this piece of wood, the girth that it's grown to indicates that it's, well, probably getting on for 100 years old. Surprising how long it takes for boxwood to grow. I'm painting the surface of this wood block with some fountain pen ink to make the surface a dark colour, so that when I engrave on it, I'll be able to see a contrast of sort of bright marks. So it just makes it much easier to see what you're doing. I find it really useful to have a strong, clear outline of an image when I'm engraving. I tend not to draw on the block sort of details or patterns or textures, just outlines, and then all the light and dark and all the patterns, they happen by a kind of intuition when I'm engraving. This is a spit sticker, and this is my favourite engraving tool. It's got a sort of leaf-shaped cutting face to it and rather rounded sides, and what the rounded sides help you to do are to engrave round corners. So this tool makes really fine lines, but especially curved lines. It's really, really good for that. So this tool is a lozenge graver, and you look at the back of it, it's got a very sharp, straight back and flat sides. And what that's designed for is it's to enable you to be able to engrave a straight line. The back of the tool kind of locks itself into the line as you're engraving it and helps you to go in a beautiful straight line. This is a tint tool, and like the lozenge graver, it's got a very sharp, straight back and flat sides, but finer lines than you can get with a lozenge graver. And it's really designed to make a sort of series of thin, fine, parallel lines that you would read visually as a tint, so a tone or a tint. So this one's a round scorper, so it's got a rounded off cutting tip to it, and the back of the tool is rounded as well. So that's also for making broad-ish cut lines, but also for making stippled dots. And the space between each line sort of determines the tone of grey that you get when the block's finally printed. If you put the lines really, really close together, then they print as a lighter tone, and if you space them much farther apart, they print as a slightly darker tone. It's a bit like a newspaper half-tone dot, how that works, but you're kind of creating it all in your own choice of marks, which is good fun. Gone back to the multiple tool briefly, but I'm going to switch back to the tint tool in a minute. I don't often use multiple tool, actually. This one's got 2 teeth, and that's about as much as I like to use at once. The block is now finished, I hope. It's certainly in a fit state to print it now. There's always some surprises when you print it, so I may have to do a tiny bit of extra cutting later when I see how the first print looks, but hopefully not. Next, the process is to roll it up with a thin layer of ink and print it in this printing press. So when there's enough ink on it, it sort of sparkles in the light, the block. And so let's have a look, see how that's doing. I think for a first printing that will do very well. So the whole thing sparkles under the light and there aren't any uneven bits of inking or any lines of the printing roller. So I think that's ready to roll. is a very thin sheet of Japanese Gampi paper, which is rather a lovely, very thin paper, but rather a lovely one. Right. Pull the arm of the press. This is just a proof. It's only the second print that's come off the block, and it's got a few things that still need to be improved. I haven't got the pressure quite right on the press quite yet, so there's sort of some patchy bits that should be printing as a dense black and are printing a bit patchily, and there's a few little problems that are showing up. You can see the rings of the wood in various places showing up in the final print. Some of them I rather like, actually. I think it works quite nicely in the foreground here, and I don't mind it in the sky areas, but I'm a little bit more concerned about it cutting through this little tiny frame of pinned butterflies in a frame there, and the little bits that are appearing here. So there's a few tiny bits that need modifying, but essentially it's looking rather good. I was really pleased with how this project went, actually, and it has given me a lot of things to think about my work going forward. I think I might well start making more constructions here in my studio of kind of semi-architectural, semi-still life things to make artwork about. I think it could be a way to go. It sounds arrogant to say it, but actually I wouldn't change anything about that particular piece. I might feel differently if I was to be asked that question again in a year's time and look back at it, because everything I'd make as an artist, you're always trying to make it that bit better next time. But just at the moment, looking at it, I'm really happy with it, and I don't think there's anything in it that I would change.